In June
officials of the World Bank, the coordinating minister of the economy, and some other members of the President Tinubu economic team are in this meeting for the public presentation of the second edition of the Nigeria Development Update for 2023. It is a biannual report by the World Bank that assesses economic and social development and prospects for the country.
The Federal Executive Council,
the World Bank Country Director for Nigeria, sets the tone for the conversation.
The Nigeria Development Update, every 6 months we try to provide very publicly our assessment of where Nigeria stands, what are the challenges currently confronting Nigeria, as well as occasionally a spotlight on the longer-term development agenda. This is part of the effort to try and, provide more basis for an informed public discourse.
Questions about inflation and the current naira scarcity are at the core of the discussions during the panel session.
Addressing the issue of the naira scarcity. Yes, unfortunate, and really the history of that lies in the naira redesign policy. There was a lot of apprehension with respect to where this was all going to end, whether at the end of the year currency would no longer be good for legal tender, and many started hoarding. This is really what happened. Many started hoarding. Happily, the Supreme Court has decided, very clearly that the currencies will be valid post the end of the year.
The two key foreign exchange consumers, over 50% of import spending is on fuel and food. The refineries are coming on stream. The government is looking to persuade Nigerians in Nigeria and Nigerians abroad to save their dollars in instruments that are attractive and that are safe in Nigeria.
Other questions from the audience focus on exchange rate stabilization, as well as exports and imports.
We have consistent raw material exports. We realize that the value addition to those raw material provide us more FX revenue. So now the administration is now focusing on processes or policies that will help to facilitate the creation of industries.
Then, of course, the backlog of foreign exchange forwards, which is obviously something dear to many people's hearts. We've already settled the outstandings of, I think, about 31 banks. On the rest, we are in negotiations as to the way and manners which those are also going to be settled. And in fact, the process of settling them has started.
Although the Nigeria Development Report commends the federal government for its economic reforms, it strongly recommends that the government take urgent steps to control inflation, sustain savings from the petrol subsidy reforms, and remove trade barriers.
All right, so we're going to delve into that, the details of it, and good enough, we have the person at the top of that conversation, the country director for Nigeria from the World Bank, Mr. Shubhra Chaudhry, joins us in the studio. Good morning, and thank you so much for your time. So for me, the first thing, because the next day, the papers and everywhere were awash with, details of the report that you had on the country. And part of it said that the World Bank is impressed with the growth rate of Nigeria. And then you also have that poverty, the number of poor Nigerians has increased to 104 million. So, isn't it contradictory?
Not really. So, and let me try and explain why. Okay. Yes, on the surface, it may sound so. Look, part of what we were applauding is the turnaround. Okay. The fact that Nigeria has been in an economic doldrums for a while. And what the basic message of the report is that the bold reforms that His Excellency President Tinubu and the new administration took just in the first few weeks has stopped the slide towards what was clearly going to be a macro fiscal crisis. So that turnaround is what we're applauding. But there's still a long way to go to Nigeria realizing its full potential. If I can just give you one analogy, think about someone who has a potential to be a star athlete on the global stage. And that's how I see Nigeria, that's how we see Nigeria. That has the potential to be absolutely a giant on the global stage, yet for many years, perhaps even many decades, has not realized that potential and in fact has become sicker, if you like, almost. And there was a need to do emergency surgery, but sometimes take courage, to take that step because it's going to be painful. That step of doing emergency surgery is essentially what we see as the reforms.
The reforms that's
in June, right? It took courage to do that, and it has been painful. Anytime after surgery, it hurts, and so you need relief. So I think the government is providing relief. We certainly stand ready to support provision of further relief. But then begins the slow journey towards recovery, and that requires kind of sticking with this. Patients have to participate in their own kind of recovery process, do the painful therapy, etc. That's where Nigeria is now. And then we see, and the title of our report was Turning the Corner. We're so close. If Nigeria sticks with this, it's been painful, there should be relief, but Nigeria needs to stick with the path that His Excellency the President kind of embarked on, instead of saying, it's become too painful, let's stop. Because then all of the pain will have been for naught.
So the thing about the pain is, if you talk to a lot of Nigerians, obviously when the subsidy was removed and the impacts, the price of petrol, and of course, cascade to a whole lot of things in the economy, a lot of people complained. And then I believe the media and the government kept saying, we have to pay for this for the future, and all of that. And a lot of Nigerians say, okay, let's face it and get, our economy to be in a better shape. But they get discouraged, when we start discussing about issues of cost of governance, the examples that leaders give, government officials. For instance, a lot of people have said, this is an austere time. The president is compelled to have at least 36 ministers. Right now we have about 44. We've seen the budget for 2024 allocate up to 15 billion naira, for the vice president's residence. Things like this show the people that perhaps the government does not really mean and it's not just the government at the federal level, but also at the subnational. You don't see a governor cut his convoy, for instance, and reduce the number of aides that he has, but they expect that the people will feel the pain. And this is where, dissenting voices come in. Nigerians are like, if we have to pay for it, you're a leader, you're supposed to lead by example. Perhaps the World Bank can advise. I don't want to put you in a tight corner, but perhaps the World Bank can advise on how to handle this. The cost of governance, the issue of the delegates to COP28, even though we had an explanation later, So issues like that really get to the people to say, we don't see you cutting your budget, we don't see you tightening your belt, but you're asking us to tighten our belt. We're already hungry before now.
No, I think, look, the calls for government to do its part and elected officials, the political leaders to do their part, look, that's natural. And that, it's absolutely right that citizens should hold their elected leaders accountable. That's good. But I do want to emphasize that this is part of an overall kind of process of improving the quality of spending, public spending in Nigeria. If you think about, I was at the National Council of Health meeting in Ekiti last month. Nigeria spends really small amounts on health. So most Nigerians have to pay out of pocket. Up to 80% of their medical spending, healthcare spending comes out of pocket instead of being helped by the government. Now, the part of the problem is Nigeria needs to spend more, but the point I made was that even the funds that are going towards health right now, and if you look at the federal budget or at the state budgets, there's so much room for improvement. There are other countries who do not spend that much more on health, and yet the health outcomes are much better. So I think this basic issue of how can government spend better, how can citizens, all stakeholders, hold government officials, elected officials accountable, Absolutely, that's part of a robust, thriving democracy. Okay. On the specifics of individual budget items, I'm not qualified to comment, but I would like to say, keep in mind the big picture. Where are the big buckets of spending? And this is going, and is that being spent well? This is why we made, we were like a broken record in terms of the fuel subsidy. Right? That was the biggest, bucket of spending, and we kept asking, is this really how Nigeria wishes to spend, the scarce fiscal resource?
Well, the World Bank still recently asked the federal government to pay subsidy. I mean, it's all shrouded in, it's not so clear out there. When we calculate, you talk to some stakeholders in the nitty-gritty of importing petrol, and then you calculate how much we pay, we still see subsidy there. And there are talks that subsidy has never really left. Look,
I want to make one thing clear. I think more than anything else, we see our role as just, putting the data, the facts, trying to clarify what the situation is. The choice is always, let me be absolutely clear, with Nigeria's leaders, but ultimately with Nigeria's, the people, right? What we were pointing out is that if you just do back of the envelope kind of estimates based on information that everyone has available, what is the official exchange rate? What is the global price, dollar price of gasoline? What is the parallel exchange rate? Right now, what would be the landing cost of petroleum? And then you compare that to what you see PMS is being sold at retail. So we were saying, look, there seems to be a gap. You said one thing, the subsidy never went. Actually, let me correct that as well. The change that happened in June, or May 29th, actually, that was real. Because remember what the price was? It was $195. It went up to, $550, almost overnight, right? That was real, and that was fiscal resources, public monies, naira, billions, trillions, actually, of naira, that was going not really clear where, and so that was real. Now the question is, as the naira depreciates, the naira cost of importing PMS will go up. Well, it depends a bit on what's happening with global oil prices, petroleum prices. But so that's all we were doing, is pointing out that, look, this subsidy might be reemerging. And more than anything else, it's just pointing it out so there can be a discussion about it. I mean, I've seen some newspaper headlines this morning saying, World Bank proposal. Well, no, we're pointing out, we want to just contribute to a better informed public discourse.
And you also said that you think petrol should be about 750 naira increase of VAT. But we, at least for journalists, what we've been asking is a more efficient management of the tax system and widening the tax net instead of increasing, the prices or the taxes.
Right. So if you heard the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mr. Wale Edun, on Wednesday at our launch, in fact, he made this point that, look, we do need to raise tax revenue. Nigeria needs to raise tax revenues, but the bulk of it should be by enhancing tax administration, bringing more people, more parts of the economy into the tax net. But that said, Nigeria's kind of has to raise revenues or needs to raise revenues by lots. I think let me give you an example. Our typical back of the kind of rule of thumb as to how much revenue a country needs to take in, public government revenues, in order to do the basic functions, law and order, security, healthcare, rural roads, electricity, etc., is about somewhere between 15 to 20% of GDP, size of the economy. In Nigeria, it is right now, even after the removal of fuel subsidies, about between 8 and 9% of GDP, which means you have, going from 8 or 9, and that, by the way, is the lowest in the world. So it's, it should not be that much of a surprise that many government services that citizens hope for and expect are not there, right? So there's a long, quite a substantial gap that has to be made up. And right now, Nigeria's tax rates themselves are very low for sub-Saharan Africa. It's not a matter of, it's rich countries, Western countries who have high rates of taxes. No, countries in the region, in sub-Saharan Africa, have much higher tax rates, like VAT rates in some cases, excise taxes. And as a result, their government revenues are also much more. So I think, yes, improving tax administration and improving the efficiency of tax collection, that's a big part of the agenda, but by itself, that won't be enough.
But I guess why a lot of Nigerians are reluctant, some people look for ways to circumvent the system. It's because, for instance, you talked about the subsidy removal and funds saved. And the government cannot say, this is how much we saved from removing subsidy in a month, and this is what we're using it for. It's not really that clear. So when you also talk of tax, people are like, I pay tax, but I still have to provide electricity for myself. I still have to put in community efforts for the road on which I operate my business or where I have my house. So what is the motivation? Why don't I just cut corners and use the money to take care of myself, since the government won't take care of me?
Yes. No, and that's completely understandable, right? So if you don't have, that basic confidence that the taxes that you pay will then be used in a way that you or the economy, society will benefit, you're going to be much more reluctant to pay. So it is something that you have to work on both sides. While collecting revenues, you also have to work on making sure those revenues are spent well. So this is part of, if you look at, we ended the presentation on Wednesday by talking about a renewed social compact, right? With government saying, look, we need more revenues to deliver better, citizens holding government accountable, making sure that those funds, tax revenues, are spent better, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. Right now, Nigeria is what I would call a very low-level equilibrium, which is where there isn't the trust, so people are not willing to pay taxes, and therefore government, even if it wanted to, is unable to, provide the kinds of services, the infrastructure that Nigeria needs. So it's not going to be easy. It's really restoring trust, but you can't say, look, let's spend better, and then we'll come back to increase revenues. Nigeria just doesn't have the time.
Revenue.
Exactly.
You don't even have the revenue.
Exactly. So therefore, it has to be on both fronts. And all I can say is that media, civil society groups, citizens, key into that by saying, okay, we will give you the benefit of the doubt in terms of, yes, there's a need for more revenues, but let's make sure it's spent better. So start paying attention to how government is spending.
Okay, we'll start paying attention. And we hope they won't come after us when we talk too much.
Look, we talk very freely. One of the points I made...
You are World Bank. We have we are regulated by Nigerian government, Nigerian agencies.
You're Nigerian citizens.
Yes, we are.
Right? We are international partners, but what I've found in my time here, 4 years here, government does not listen always or agree with us. And absolutely they shouldn't. But what I've never felt is an effort to say, stop talking. There's a freedom here to express our opinions, which we really appreciate, and we don't take it for granted.
All right, talking about government not agreeing with you, I remember, I think, was it early this year or late last year, where you talked about the intervention funds of the Central Bank of Nigeria and the rate of repayment, which you placed very minimal as at that time. And of course, the Central Bank did come out to say that wasn't true. So I guess from your stance, you're happy now that the current leadership of the Central Bank of Nigeria is saying no more loans into those intervention funds.
Yes, in the sense that, one of the basic principles of economics, and then I think just it's common sense, is that if you have an agency or, a team that's set up to do X, then let it focus on doing X and doing it well, and whoever is set up or best placed to do something else, Y, should focus on doing Y. And in fact, Governor Cardoso, again, at our event on Wednesday, that's precisely what he said. He said, look, central bank's focus is on price stability, right? And we have to get our, spend all our attention, time, and efforts on that. on these other schemes, what are called, quasi-fiscal schemes or, development interventions, they may be needed, but it is not the central banks. We're not qualified to take that role on. So let's set, if they are needed, they should be done properly. There should be accountability, transparency around them. And whichever part of government should take that on, should take that on. Right? So in that sense, we couldn't agree more. Right? That the central banks all around the world, their core function is price stability. And right now, with year-on-year inflation in the high 20s, that's more than enough. And with the pressures on the naira, restoring confidence in the naira, et cetera, and these are all linked. Inflation, what's happening with the exchange rate. It was wonderful to hear the governor say that, look, the CBN is going to focus on that, take it up very seriously.
Yeah, so I guess the argument was that when you look at the drivers of Nigeria's inflation, it's not really like any other country. It's more of supply and demand. And so perhaps if you want to deal with inflation, then you have to go to the source of those supply and demand. If you talk about food inflation, which is a major driver, you talk about the supply of food, 80% or more of Nigeria's food is being imported. So, of course, with the FX issue, we expect that to feed in. So I guess that was it. So I wonder how the central bank, anyway, now they say they're looking at target inflation. That's their focus now. So how can they make it work and effective?
So if you think about what's driven the inflation rate higher and higher in Nigeria, some of it has to do with just how much money is circulating. So one part of that is that money supply, the growth of money supply, and the fact that the central bank was de facto financing the fiscal deficit of government. This is the famous ways and means, right? So that was, and so if you have money in the economy that's circulating and not enough being produced, that's going to increase prices. Second was, if you go back to August of 2019, when the borders were closed, okay? Just look at the inflation series, there was an uptick, okay? Just goods that were flowing in, because Nigeria, right, at that point couldn't meet the demand from domestic supply, all of a sudden the prices went up. So you could actually see inflation is going like this, it started proceeding up. Obviously, as the naira has depreciated, that has that has increased prices because so many items are imported. So in that sense, again, the central banks focus on restoring confidence in the naira, getting inflation down, making sure that there's no need for recourse to ways and means, tighter monetary policy. Again, the governor mentioned open market operations, what they call OMOs, to try and soak in some. The way that we hope this will play out is that, again, there might be some short-term pain, but as inflation comes under control, the pressures on the naira come down, and then overall, prices will keep increasing, but not at the rates you're seeing. And then incomes can keep pace.
So you think this will help the value of the naira, which is
absolutely
dropped over 30%?
Yes, absolutely. So that's the link between what's happening domestically in terms of, the stance of the monetary authorities of the central bank, what's happening with inflation, feeds into, are people willing to hold their money in naira? If you think your naira is going to basically lose purchasing power because of high rates of inflation, you say, hey, I'm going to try and hold my money in dollars. Or if you have dollars and you're a foreign investor abroad, say, I'm less willing to bring my dollars into the economy. So inflation, getting a handle on inflation, will be part of what it'll take to restore confidence in the naira.
So one of the things that the World Bank is doing in Nigeria is renewable energy. And that is, very necessary because we know that businesses suffer. One of the major costs of operation in Nigeria is, power, So tell us about the program and how you hope to get it to the people who really need them. I think we can start with businesses.
Right. So I think the program that I think you're referring to is one that was just approved by our board yesterday, in fact. And it is a $750 million credit facility for the government, and in particular the Electrification Agency. And the way it's meant to work is, it's basically, we call it Nigeria DARES, which stands for Distributed Access.
Okay, I just have to get it down. Nigeria
DARES.
DARES, DARES. Okay.
So Distributed Access through Renewable Energy Scale-Up. Okay. And the basic idea is very simple. It's that there are 80 million Nigerians, and obviously lots of small businesses, micro businesses, that don't have any access to electricity. Meaning it's not even unreliable power. They just have no access, right? So the idea is to reach those 80 million, as well as many in, say, peri-urban areas who have unreliable access, who do have maybe a grid connection, but it's not reliable, and give them the option of solar power. Okay? And the idea is most of this can be done by private firms who come in and install mini grids. So solar mini grids. But to keep the tariffs affordable, it helps if government provides an initial capital subsidy, a subsidy to kind of offset some of the capital expenses of setting up, of installing the grid. So that's basically the idea of the $750 million. That will be used primarily for incentives, capital subsidies, other things for private firms to come in and put in their own capital, and we anticipate upwards of $1 billion or more of private capital will come in to increase access through, we call it distributed access because this is not going to solve all the problems of the grid. There are separate support that we're trying to provide there, but at least in the meantime, small businesses, firms, households, and then I want to emphasize the importance of electricity for families. Kids to study at night, okay, or primary healthcare centers to have some way of storing, critical supplies. Okay, so this program, hopefully through this distributed, kind of provision of mini grids, solar home systems, will help provide that access. And eventually, the grid expands, becomes more reliable, all of that. But,
so which areas are you focusing on or targeting first?
So through this $750 million credit, it is largely for all the households and firms who do not have any
rural
access.
Areas?
Could be rural, could be peri-urban, okay, who do not have any access or who have unreliable access, which tends to be in more peri-urban areas. And frankly, those households who cannot afford to have, a diesel generator or even a petroleum-powered generator, to switch on and off.
Yeah.
I'm sure your studios here have that, right? So.
All right, thank you so much for your time this morning. I do know that you do have meetings, but you took out time to be. We really appreciate your time, Mr. Shubram Chaudhary, the country director for Nigeria from World Bank. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.